Hello, George, Fat Ninja Food Forest. I'm working on my compost today, taking our food scraps and our animal waste and building a compost. Thought I'd take an opportunity to talk about compost and three ways of doing it. Least energy intensive, simplest way, hardest way, and right there in the middle. So the least energy intensive way is to chop and drop. You can leave things in place. All around our garden beds we have material that's down, this brown material, that carbon, being broken down by those microbes, covering that soil, acting as a mulch as it feeds the soil. Works great. In our swales, we put wood chips in them, and they break down over a year. I have lots of videos on that, how the fungus comes in and breaks it down, calls the insects in, and their frass and their waste, feeding our animals. So that'd be two ways of doing it. Composting in place. Simplest way, but if we have weed seeds that we didn't get a hold of, flowers, weeds went to seed, or their flowers went to seed, and they fall in place, we're going to get a lot of seeds. If there's any disease material in that carbon and nitrogen that went into there, any of those plants were diseased, they got dropped, you're going to have that disease around. So we often are taught to make a thermophilic compost. So it is one of the best ways, but it's the most labor intensive because we have to pile these materials up. I'm going to show you one. We have to get them up to a temperature, make sure we get to a certain temperature, hold that temperature for a certain amount of time, and turn it at least 3 times. And what we're doing is we can think of that pile in 3 different parts, top, bottom, and center. We want to make sure that center gets up to that 142 to be specific, 142 to 162. That's going to kill those disease pathogens. That's going to kill those weed seeds that might be in there. 130 almost does it for most of them, but really want to be up to that 142 is what they tell us. So that's energy intensive, making that, adding the water, flipping it 3 times. And so on the far end, or I'm sorry, right in the middle, that's the far end. In the middle is worm composting. I sell worms, so this is a little bit of a sales pitch. But worms are the easiest way to do it. The thermophilic, which is one of the safest ways, we have to get a large enough pile to get at least 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet to hold that energy long enough to stay at temperature through 3 turnings at a hot enough temperature. Quite often, people don't produce enough waste to do that. You can build up the materials, then put it together. Slow down a little bit. You can build up your materials, put them together later on, do it in buckets, but it gets a bit of a pain. In the growing season, we produce more. Us with chickens and so much going on there, we have plenty of material. But if you don't, then worms are the simple way to do it. Because what it does is it goes through that worm system. It's actually going to be broken down by those microbes first, and then goes through a worm system. It's mostly bacterial. And then it kills any weed seed. The seed can't go through. It's been broken down. So it takes care of the seeds. And any pathogens are going to be broken down on the process of going through that worm system. So, safest is a good thermophilic and worm castings, equally safe. Most labor intensive is doing that thermophilic compost. Simplest would be chop and drop in place, but making sure that you're using materials that don't have any disease or weed seed in them. So if you're putting your annual vegetables and things from around the yard, you're just not sure, it's better to make that a thermophilic compost. A combination of the two is you can, what I do as someone that sells compost, I make a thermophilic compost first, and that thermophilic compost breaks down that material, the decomposers in that soil food web, make it easy for the worms to consume it. And then I feed that thermophilic compost, once it's cooled a little, but younger compost, to the worms. So we're double checking that way. If I didn't get up to temperature, I didn't hold it to temperature long enough, part of that pile didn't make it into the hottest part, we're putting it through the worm system as well. A double check on that makes it really safe. We'll go over here and look at my thermophilic pile. This is originally. We'll also look at some worm systems that I sell, or you can make yourself, just just for the worms. I do sell worms by themselves by the pound, but what I really try to promote is our breeder bins. So that's a half pound of worms, 500 to 600 worms, but really big and healthy. We've been feeding them a wonderful diet, promoting a smaller population, so that promotes breeding. So in that area, there's going to be probably 1,000 cocoons, each of those cocoons having 4 worms in it. So your population really explodes quickly. But the big part about buying a whole system is you can dump it right into one of these bins that I'm going to show you, or whatever you have as a system going, and it inoculates that system with all that microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, microarthropods, nematodes, decomposing and feeding on one another, making it ready for the worms. Okay, let's look at a thermophilic pile over here. So this is a fenced off 10 by 10 area or so where I do my compost piles. When one finishes and I turn it, I'm ready for the next one to be built. Oldest to youngest, going around in a circle. What I do is I take, as you can see, some of the leaves that I've stored next to it. I don't put too many of those in a layer. Straw bedding from the chicken house right next door where that door is. All their poop and pee in there, that carbon of the straw and the nitrogen of their waste. I grab some more carbon of the wood chips that were out front, partially decomposed. Food scraps here. So if you just had worms, if you didn't have all this other organic matter, this ohm, and you just had the food scraps, you can feed that directly to worms and put some leaves on top. So crunch that up, put it on top of your worm system, and take some leaves or straw or wood chips and put it on top. So you're getting the carbon and the nitrogen, covering the nitrogen so it doesn't smell, and working our way up. We'll probably see worms. I just turned this. I'm not sure if they'll be right here at the top. But there's worms all through there's one right there. So you have my compost pile is right full of worms and centipedes. All kinds of life in it. As it gets hot in the center, they move to the outside. As the freezing weather comes, they go in far enough I'm sure we lose some. But I used to read that they cook or freeze when they're outside. They're smarter than humans. So here, these are the bin systems I sell. Anyone can make one of these. This is what I started with. It's a very simple way to compost. It's called a 2-bin system. So what we do is we compost in one bin until it's about halfway full. Then we take the second bin and place it on top of that and start feeding our compost layers into there, those browns and greens. As the red wigglers in the bottom run out of food there, they crawl through holes that are in the bin into the second bin and harvest themselves. Let's have a look. Here you can see different sized bins. I offer a couple other ones. I don't have them on hand. But these, one-handed, slide out. And we see the holes in the bottom. And the holes in the bottom there. So as this one gets halfway full, I'll put that bin inside, start feeding this bin. Worms will harvest themselves. I take the bottom bin out of there, use it on my garden or my house plants. Use it on my garden or my house plants and start that whole process over again. So anybody can do this. It could be 2 buckets inside of each other, 2 bins, anything. Just a real simple way of composting. So we don't need to get that 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot thermophilic pile up to that 142 degrees and holding the temperature. It's a good way to try to do it first. And then if it doesn't get there, or even when it does, feed it to your worms. If you don't have that much organic matter, we have different sizes of these that you can keep in your garage. One to go under your sink for small amounts. Even an apartment dweller could have a small one of these and feed your house plants with your food scraps, keeping it out of the landfill. I'm George, Fat Ninja Food Forest. Change to be better than a holiday and is long overdue. We'll be starting classes here middle of January. Go to fatninjafoodforest.com, leave your email on the mailing list if you want, and we'll get out a list real soon. Leave your name on the mailing list, and we'll get a list out soon of this year's classes. Change to be better than a holiday, long overdue. Peace.